People walk around with this impending fear that anything that they do is going to make them lose their job. And if they lose their job, there's a whole spiral that comes along with that, right?
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring the journey of authenticity in the workplace and discovering how to navigate it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sadakar, and today I'm excited to have my friend Kara Kirby on the show to talk about change. Now, change is everywhere in our lives and in our organizations. And it's so important to have the tools that we need to work through changes to ensure that they don't create chaos. In this episode, Kara and I are diving into some of the types of changes, both big and small, that we might experience at work and what we often forget to consider when we're leading changes. Then Kara and I give our best advice for both leaders and individuals experiencing change on how to navigate it more effectively, and we'll share some of our favorite frameworks and tools and resources that you can use in your career or on your team. I'm excited to share this conversation with you. Okay, Kara, welcome to Working Your Way. I'm excited to have you here.
Yay! So excited to be here. Taking our offline conversations online.
Yes. I was literally just going to say that. I was like, today's episode is going to be like as if you hit record on one of our conversations on the phone about work and the client stuff we're doing and just hit publish. So it's going to be great.
Excited.
So we're going to talk about a really big topic today. And yeah, frankly, this probably should be like a multi-part episode, but we're going to talk about change. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do this and do this episode now is just, I feel like so many people are going through so much change, both personal, but also within teams, within organizations. And I want to kind of just like give a little bit of a foundation of how do we think about change? Like, how do we think about the things that are going on in our organizations as change? And what can we do to navigate them better and help our teams through it? And I think starting out with talking about just like what are some changes that people might go through in organizations. And I know you have a ton of experience with this with your clients, personally, with companies that you've worked for. And so what are some of the big changes that you see people going through right now at work?
Whew. I mean, there's a lot. I think there's the obvious ones like mergers and acquisitions. I joke about this a lot, even though it's not funny, but sometimes when companies freak out, the first thing that they do is go straight to a reorg. So
Mm,
reorgs happen all the time. So teams becoming different. If a company wants to change their strategy or change their culture, there's all these big things that are out there right now. And I also think that the other thing that needs to be on that list is that there's little changes that happen that leaders and organizations need to be just as aware of, because sometimes what happens in organizations is that leaders get into this room where it's just them and they talk and talk and talk and work through issues, and then they're 5 miles down the road and it's already processed in their brain, and then they spit some information out to the organization and then ask the question of why wasn't it readily accepted. And it could just be a little change for them, but it could be a big change to the rest of the organization. So I think that changes, there's big things, but it's also how are you minding the little things that build up over time, because it's just as important.
yeah, I love that. I actually was just sharing this in a talk I did recently for a client about the idea of like, if you're running a marathon, you have all these people kind of like huddled together at the starting line. And when the race starts, the people at the front of the pack start the race and they're like well down the path going before even the people that were at the back of the pack even start the race. And
Mhm.
then you think you're halfway down the race when other people are just starting. And it's like we forget that like that it takes some time for that momentum to build. It takes some time for people to get to where you even started. And if we think about that, we can actually then say, oh, I have to go back 5 months to when we started talking about this in the boardroom and give people the context of why this was going on, right? And I think that's like exactly what you were just saying too.
Yeah, you have to it's It's just kind of like the idea that there's no such thing as an organizational culture. I mean, there is, but it's the collection of the tiny experiences that people have with one
Mm,
another, right? So I think you can almost look at change the same way. It's like, how are we systematically approaching all of the small changes that happen in the organization? And if we're paying attention to all of those things, that means that we're doing change well as an organization. And I would just say that organizations, I always call this out, is that we need a different word. Like we need to call organizations like collections of humans, because
yeah.
because that's all it is at the end of the day. And humans are messy and they're fallible. So, of course, you don't have a lot of really great examples of organizations doing these little changes well, because humans don't do change well, right? Like, you'll have a bunch of like messy, fallible humans bringing all their trauma and like spitting it up all over each other. Like, it's just complicated because it's a human issue at the end of the day.
Yeah. So what are some of the small changes that you see kind of maybe people getting tripped up in, or what types of things would fall in that bucket?
I think if you think about the experience at work, like if you get a new boss, if you get a new team member on the team, maybe if the team is changing a project, or maybe there's someone on the team that gets promoted, right? Like there's these little actions that happen all the time on a team that, if not given context, they can cause damage. So, like, it's like if you're on a team and your coworker gets promoted instead of you, and you thought that maybe like you were up for that promotion, if someone isn't explaining to you that process, it's going to take that employee and completely disengage them, right? Like, and I think that, if going back to the topic of reorgs, that is a time to be very, very careful, because you've taken a group of people that have formed a bond with each other and that have hopefully found a good working relationship, and then you're splitting that up and you're creating new members. I mean, I think reorgs are a big change inside of organizations, but sometimes they're looked at as a little change. And I yeah, I could probably talk on that for all day long, that that is not the solution. Like, if you can avoid it, stop reorging your organization every 5 seconds.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point, and I think we're going to continue to have this as a theme of like organizations underestimate change. And so if you actually thought about how much, or knew or were aware of how much work needs to go into making a change successful, would you still make the choice to do it? And like being more choiceful about how much change we enact in an organization is like incredibly critical.
Yes.
So I don't know how much I've shared this with you. I've shared it on this podcast at certain points, but like funny enough, I mean, like really the origin of my own business was having gone through some like really major changes. Like I went through two different acquisitions at two different companies in the span of like 3 years. And on both sides of the acquisition, after the acquisition, the leadership was very disengaged, wasn't really people forward, didn't, at least with their actions, value culture and value the talent that they brought into the organization. And both of those times, it left me like really demotivated, disengaged, like, and you know me, I am like type A, I work hard, like I'm an achiever. And those experiences both turned me into someone who was kind of like phoning it in at work. And I think that impact of a change being underestimated was that I didn't feel valued, I didn't feel seen. In fact, I felt the opposite. And so my business started because I was like, wow, leaders really mess this one up. And I think if they were aware of how big of an impact this can have, they might do it differently.
I Yeah, maybe. I feel like that's like the answer we're always trying to find, is like, how do you wake people up? I asked that question one time to like a really, really kind of like seasoned, famous OD practitioner. I was like, what happens when an organization is like completely going down the wrong path? They're ignoring all their people, that like people are leaving left and right. They're actively disengaged. Like, what is it that wakes that organization up? And I thought she was gonna have this, like, really profound answer, and do you wanna know what she said?
I'm dying. I'm dying to know.
She said this is not hopeful, but she said lawsuits. And I was like,
Oh my
I read,
God. Oh no.
I mean, maybe she was like, she had lost her hope or whatever, but I don't know. I think there's just like a really important question there is like, is it possible when like everyone in the organization disengaged and there's negative energy and like, I don't know. It's really interesting because I've seen it too. I mean, obviously, I've seen a really wonderful organization just completely go dark and it's like the on the opposite end of it, it's that people are so they cannot figure it out or they're not trying. I don't know what the deal is, but um yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know what that situation is all about. I mean we have to sustain hope, right? Like you can have a new leader that goes into the organization that can turn it around. People can start being honest, I guess, right? But it's a hard situation whenever people just start forgetting about their people.
Yeah. So let's talk about when there is good intention behind it, right? I think one of the things that I've noticed that a lot of my clients are going through is just like really rapid growth. And
Mhm.
so that looks like acquiring another agency as a part of their own, right? Merging agencies together, like growing geographic regions, growing customer bases. I have a client right now who is just growing their business a lot. And so they're like turning a lot of people over in their organization or like adding new roles, adding new structure. And so I see change happening every day at a really rapid pace in like both of these scenarios. And I think one of the things that, I know you and I have talked about a lot is like why changes fail oftentimes is because we forget about the fact that people are messy and people are infallible and people have emotions and people bring all their own outside stuff into work too, right? And so this idea of like uncertainty for humans is a hard one. So, how do we think about uncertainty, how our systems respond to uncertainty, and how that impacts organizational changes? Like, we've talked a lot about, different biases and survival mode. Like, what do you see playing out sometimes in these situations?
I'm actually gonna turn this into a positive. Um, I worked the first company actually both the companies I worked with went through massive growth at all times. And it was not like it wasn't a struggle. There were things that were a struggle, but there was excitement behind it, right? So I think that that is a reframing. There can be excitement. Change could be excited. So one of my favorite quotes is that people do not resist change, they resist being changed. So I think if this is just a rule of thumb, two things of advice. If you involve your people, you get the closest to the customer, you get the closest to the problem, and you let the people build the solutions for that growth. You involve them, and you don't just make this something that four people are talking about at the top of the house, and it's actually an organization that you're involving into the conversation. That will work wonders. And the second thing is just honesty. Um, I think sometimes that people think that they can get away with like sugarcoating or not telling. I don't want to say lying, but it's like not telling like the whole truth and that the organization will just go along with it. And I just feel like it never happens. Like you have to be honest and realize that you have these really educated adults that are working at your organization and they're not going to fall for it unless it's honest. And the moment that they feel like it's not honest anymore, you're going to create disengagement. So involve them and make sure that you're honest. You don't have to be transparent. You don't have to tell them everything. You just have to be honest.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that people don't share what, call it whatever you want, call it the whole truth, right? Share the whole story is um, some leaders are like, oh, well, people don't need to know everything, or I'm overloading them with information, or if I share this piece of information, they're going to have all of these questions that I don't have answers to. And I think those are like very real and like valid
Mhm.
fears and concerns. But I think your point of like, if we treat our employees like full grown, fully functioning adults, we can have those conversations of I don't know this part yet and I don't know when I'm going to know, but like let's stay close if a decision comes up that might be, hinging on these things. I think that transparency and communication is important, but I also it's bringing up for me like we can't jump into a change without like a foundation of trust. So being able to
Yeah.
like build that, like you've got to have that as a priority before you get into these situations too, because you can't go into a relationship that doesn't have trust and say, I'll tell you when you need to know and expect that that person's not going to freak out, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, there has to be psychological safety, there has to be trust before first and foremost. And I think that, again, when I think back, I've done a lot of thinking about, like, wait, what made those companies work versus, like, what makes other companies, the culture not really, like, connect the dots, and that's definitely a big one. Like, something I would always say to people that were on my team, or if I was, like, running onboarding stuff in both of these organizations was that it's really hard to get fired. Like, you're gonna know so many times before it actually happens, right? Like, and you have to do things that are really, really egregious to lose your job. And in both of those situations, I could actually say that and feel like I was being honest because it was the truth. There people walk around with this impending fear that anything that they do is gonna make them lose their job. And if they lose their job, there's a whole spiral that comes along with that, right? Like, it's like, I'm gonna lose my house, then my family, you know what I mean? Like, our brains go to these really, really bad places. So if you could just give people a little bit of safety and like with that trust and say that like, it's hard to lose your job here, it goes a long way and it makes it so that they can digest that change a lot easier.
Yeah, I think and safety, I will say coming from a personality kind of framework mentality, safety looks very different for different people, right? That kind of like catastrophizing disaster of like, okay, if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to lose my job. There are a whole subsegment of people that do jump there, right? They're like, if I speak up in a meeting and I say something wrong, like I'm going to get fired tomorrow. Like actually have those thoughts on a regular basis. There are people who are like just the uncertainty of not having all the information makes them feel like they're not capable of coping. There are people who feel like when control is taken away from them, that they've got to find ways to get control over that. Or there are relationship based people, right, where it's like, I don't need you to tell me I'm not going to lose my job, but I do need to feel seen. And I need to feel seen in a way that's like, you value me for what I bring to the table and you've got my back, you know? So it's just like thinking about and understanding those things about your people too, of like what makes each person feel safe in a workplace scenario, that can kind of hold that relationship during these kind of maybe tumultuous times.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what else happens to people when they face uncertainty? You mentioned a little bit about it. It's like our brains can do crazy things when we don't have that safety.
Yeah, so like in the unknown space, our minds do not go to positive places. And
Yeah.
right? It's I teach a lot of classes on conversations and why people avoid having hard conversations, which is a human problem. Well, sometimes if you're someone who goes into like confrontation mode, you don't have a problem with it, but you're still not good at conversations, right? Like like those people that are like, oh, if I have something to say, I just say what's on my mind, and I'm like, that's not actually communication. It's just like you're just talking at someone, right? So like I just think collectively we all need to get better at having conversations. But when you think about why people avoid having conversations, it's because on the other side of that, they're like, if I go and I bring up this important topic with this person, all these horrendous things are going to happen, right? It's never that I'm gonna go and have this conversation and good things are gonna come on the other side of it, like the relationship's gonna get strengthened, we're gonna have clarity, we're gonna find a mutually beneficial solution. It's always catastrophe on in what is in our minds. And that is also with change. And I think that that's important to know if you are leading change on a team or leading change in an organization, is that if there's change that's on the horizon, unless you've done a really good job of creating safety and making people feel like they're not going to lose their jobs and creating excitement around it, people's brains are going to go to catastrophe. Like they're always going to think that there's bad things on the other side of it, because that's just how we're wired as humans. We're wired to survive. We're not wired to think in abundance, right? So I think it's
Yes.
just important. It's like if I'm taking people through the changes, what are the catastrophes they're thinking of? And maybe how do I address that, right? Like that can be a guide for people as well.
Yeah. I think there's this so there's this model that I really love, which is the bridges transition model, and it's
Mhm.
about the endings, which are, I know you're familiar with this, but I'll say it for for anyone listening's benefit. The ending of the thing is the thing we have to think about first before we even think about what the new thing is. So if you're personally getting a promotion, right? We often think about, oh my gosh, I've worked hard for this promotion. I've checked all these boxes. Now I'm going to get my new title and my new salary and my new responsibilities. It's going to be great. And we don't often stop to think about, what am I leaving behind?
Mhm.
Maybe there was a certain amount of flexibility that you're giving up to take on this new role. Maybe there's a team that you're leaving to go into this new role with a new team. Maybe there's a level of like comfort that you have with the work that you've been doing. Like, I'm an expert over here and I'm not an expert over here. And that's going to be something that I'm leaving behind, that mentality of like knowing what I'm doing every day, or even a type of relationship that you have with your peers that's going to change. And so we often don't stop to think about, okay, what actually are the things that I might have to let go of, or that I might leave behind. And so then when we get to that new place, we're like shocked at, oh my God, not everything's perfect. And now I'm like really confused about this whole situation. And so I think that's an important piece, but that wasn't even, and I want you to respond to that, but that wasn't even the part that I was thinking about when I started to describe this model, was like the middle part. So there's the ending, the middle, and the beginning, right? And the middle part is where we can actually like innovate and do
Mhm.
interesting things and come up with new ideas. And that's also the time where people, without being given some direction, some container to like be positive, they're naturally going to go to that negative. So it's like, what's going to go wrong? What are the risks here? What are all the potential pitfalls? But if we can actually like intentionally use that time to say, what could be better? What could be amazing about this change?
Mhm.
Like, what are the new things that we can do now because of this new thing that's going on? We can kind of shift that mindset, right? That we naturally as humans go into. So I just said a lot
Yes.
there.
No, I love it, and I love that model too, and I think that that's a great point of we can shift the mindset, but I also think that if there's an awareness piece, so I always use this as an example when it comes to change. It's like whenever you graduate from college or you graduate from grad school, it's like your mind is always like all these amazing things that are going to happen after college, right? Like I hit this point and all these amazing things are going to happen. But even if it's a positive change, you're still, so Bridges' model came from studying grief. So when we go through change, we go through grief. So part of that grief is that uncertainty and that anxiety and a little bit of depression. Like that's going to happen with change. But if we know that that's going to happen, it makes it so that we can go through that messy middle a little bit easier. So that's, I think that like thinking about the other side is really good. But also, if there's a change happening, like if we could just let people know that you're going to have some gunky emotions that are involved with it, like you don't have to like skip through those. It's just natural because change and grief is the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I always talk about that with college because I feel like college kids will graduate and then they all get anxious and depressed and they go through this stuff. And I'm like, hey, listen, like that's natural. Like you'll come out the other side, but you're going through a big change. And also, like when you have your first baby, like your life, these life um, points, right? These like really important
Mhm.
points in life also come with grief in a way, right? So, yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about.
Totally. And it is this idea of like, oh, I'm getting married. I've been wanting this for so long, or I'm having a kid.
Mhm.
This is like something we've been dreaming about, right? And so you think about these like positive changes. And again, this can be a merger with another company. It can be like a
Yeah.
promotion at work. It can be a new strategy you're going to enact. Like those things were like, we're trained to be so excited about the good parts of it. And we're also really like socialized not to think about what we're losing because we should be grateful for the baby that we just had, and like you want to be a parent. Of course you do. And there's some like hard things about it. And so when we ignore those hard things, that's when it does kind of pile up and cause problems and cause resistance and all of those things, like you mentioned.
Especially if there's an identity shift. So, like, that's the hardest thing for people too, is that, like, within that change, if there's some part of your identity that you have to shift, it's gonna be that much harder to move through those different cycles. I mean, it's absolutely possible, but it's like the more that we understand that it's just part of life is to embrace those emotions and embrace that natural cycle, it just makes it so it's not as painful as you're going through it.
Yeah, I think that is such an important thing to talk about too, is like the identity, the new identity, the old identity that we're leaving behind. Like in that promotion example that I used, right? We are changing our identity. You're moving into a
Mhm.
new level of leadership, a new level of responsibility. You might have identified with being really great at certain things, and now you're not going to have those things necessarily anymore, depending on, how much your job changes. So what kind of identity shifts, what other kinds of identity shifts do you see happening in the workplace? I mean, culture could be a big one of them too, right? Teams.
Yeah. Um, I think that, you're gonna see it the most when people move through the different levels of leadership, right? Because that's a big one is well, the one I see most often is that transition piece of going from individual contributor to leader of others. If that you have to shift your identity with being really good at your work. And it has to move into being really good at helping empower other people. And, the cardinal mistake that organizations make all the time is that they promote the highest performing person and they're not really paying attention to how they work with others or what their conversation skills look like, which is possible. Like you can have a high performer and teach some people skills afterwards, but it's just gonna be a little bit harder because they do have to go through an identity shift.
Hmm.
Yeah, like, and then it goes up even a level, right? Like, so it's like these things that you get good at, like, you're gonna get good at, like, working at doing the job. You're really awesome at doing the job, and now you have to leave that all behind to become a leader, and you have to empower others and be really good with people. Well, maybe you get really good at leading a team, and then you have to move up another level, and you have to leave that behind, and you have to get really good at teaching other people how to be leaders. And, like, all of those things include an identity shift, and I think that that's the biggest one inside of organizations probably is just, like, the role you have in the success of the organization.
Yeah. I think about it too. Like, I mean, there is a sense of like collective identity that can play into this when there are those bigger changes. And when I worked for a big beauty brand at this Fortune 50 company, and several of the brands or a couple of like the divisions were breaking off to go to a new company. Our specialty beauty, business was leaving P&G, which, everyone knows that I work there if they want to like look at my LinkedIn. So, we're leaving P&G and going to a new company. And there were in this it was an acquisition. It was splitting off part of a company and merging it with an existing one. The like idea behind this was like, okay, we're going to take the best of both worlds. It's the talent and the structure and the rigor of P&G, and we're going to bring it into this company that's a smaller beauty company that's more agile and wants to spend more money on these categories than P&G was. And so this idea and faster innovation, right, more trend forward because it's like just a beauty company and we can move quickly. So this idea of best of both worlds was like the whole kind of umbrella of how this merger was going to happen or this acquisition was going to happen. And it was so interesting because we had branding. Let me tell you, like, I don't know how much an agency was paid to like make these beautiful visuals of this butterfly and the change and everything that was going
Oh
to
my
happen, right? And,
god.
and this like better together mentality of like, yeah, I know,
Always.
right?
It's
This
always better together.
transformation. And now on the other side, we're going to have the best of both worlds. We're going to have all the structure and we're going to have the agility and we're going to have great people and we're going to have great trend, insight. And day one of the acquisition, everybody was in their new offices, but like there was no all company like welcome. There was and even, I mean, I stayed for 9 months. There was never an in-person meeting to get everybody together to talk
Wow.
about it. Yeah, it was wild, Kara. Because, like, if you think about this idea of like, we value all of you that we're bringing in, and we're going to be better together. And like, the words said that, and the actions said, just keep doing your job, put your head down and deliver dollars. And like the stark contrast between what was said and what was done, what the employees could feel was like huge. It was like a ravine in between those two things.
Yeah, it goes back to honesty. Like, if there's an incongruency between what is said versus what is actually experienced by the humans working together, it's going to feel like everyone is being lied to. And whenever people feel like they're being lied to, they completely shut down, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
those are always my two things. It's like, be honest and involve people. If you do that, it's not this huge hill to climb. It's just so many people forget to do that. And yeah, it's like what like all this time is spent on marketing and coming up with this picture. I always say that like, all right, if you know there's going to be an incongruency, like I don't really ever know what's going on with these companies. If like they just get excited and then it's like squirrel, they go on to the next thing. Like that's giving the most grace of like why this happens. So like every merger in history is like, we're going to be better together. And then it just never happens. But it's like, I feel like there would be better results if they just said, we need to consolidate and we need to make more money for this organization to survive. You're going to make more money if you help us do this, period. Like, it's honest. People be okay with it. Like, I think also with like the changing dynamics of like culture and after the pandemic, like people do not need to be in this like rosy world. They're at a company that has like ping pong tables, a pizza party. Like, they don't want that anymore. They want work-life balance. They want to be able to be paid equally, right? They want pay equity and they want to feel like they are considered in the organization, like their ideas are going to be considered. Like it's not rocket science, but it's just yeah, it's just mind-boggling how often such a simple thing is is missed. I'll never understand it.
Yeah, I do think like in that instance too, the identity piece was a big gap, right? Because it's like, okay, you've got all these people who left this company that, many of them really highly identified with, working
Yeah.
there.
Y'all like formed your life around that company.
Right. And then you go into this new company and you never have a moment like physically to establish this new identity of like, who is this greater team, this broader team that's come together now? And like, I do think, fluffy things don't matter, but like the investment in an in-person meeting in this particular instance, I think would have gone such a long way because it's like, we never actually came together to say like, who are we now like together? It's like, yeah, we have the butterfly. It's beautiful. Great. We've got swag. I got a t-shirt and a, and a tote bag, but like, how do we feel together? Like, how are we defining this new identity of this new company that's now like come together of these two parts?
And that's not a fluffy thing. That's a hard thing. Like
Right.
having leaders that would have like it's like thinking about like would you have fixed that as someone who does what we do with organizations. It's not hard. It would have been being honest, like getting people together and like forming new stories of this organization. And it would have been leaders that were trained well enough that they knew how to bring teams together. Done. It would have been fine, right? Like
Totally.
me it's not hard to do. It just gets missed all the time. And that's the hard stuff. That's pizza, ping pong tables, swag, butterflies. That is soft stuff. Bringing people together, problem solving, leaders that actually know how to have good conversations and know how to build teams. That's hard stuff. All right, I'm done with my
Yeah.
rant on that.
No, I love it. I love it. I'm curious. I know a model that you work with. So talked about this bridges idea of like the ending, the middle, and the beginning. And one framework that you work with a lot is appreciative inquiry. And I'm curious,
Mhm.
like, can you explain a little bit about that and like how that can help teams or organizations or individuals through change?
Appreciative inquiry is a really, really awesome model. Really, I think at the heart of it is this concept that our words create our worlds. So if you think about an organization that is struggling, if like you could listen to them, a lot of it is probably depreciative language. So everything is a problem. They're thinking about their organization. They're like, who are the low performers? Who do we need to get out of here? Like, where are we struggling? How are the competitors like beating us? How do we fix that? How do we fill that gap? Like, all of that is depreciative language. Appreciative language is something that's counterintuitive to a lot of organizations. And it's asking the questions of what are we doing well? Where are the strengths of our people? If someone is floundering, how do we get them in a role that might be better suited to them? How do we stop talking about problems and more talk about opportunities? And so what I do a lot of times, whenever organizations are like, we're having this issue, I go back to that principle of you need to get your people to solve the problem because I've seen it be successful a million times. And so we go through a process where we get everybody together and say it's very similar to design thinking, but we say what is the core thing? Maybe it's that how do we build a culture that everyone will want to be a part of? How do we build leaders that everyone would want to follow? How do we build an organization that isn't afraid to fail? You have a core question and then you build the positives around it of where are we doing it well right now? What does it look like in the future if we really, really do this well? We keep doing it well. And what are the things that we need to do today that will make it so that we can make that future a reality? And here's the magic. It's not rocket science. When people build the solution, they don't have to go through as much as that change process because they're part of it. They don't resist being they don't resist change, they resist being changed. So if they're the ones that are coming up with the ideas of the change, they're most likely going to be bought in, and then it makes it so that you don't have to go through all of those struggles. So that's I usually weave in some kind of appreciative inquiry into anything that I do because it's such a powerful way to get people to shift their minds and really do it together.
So, how would you see that playing into a big change that a team or an organization is going through, like maybe a strategy change?
So the first company I worked with, I talk about this example a lot, but they went from like zero to $1 billion overnight. And they're still in existence and they're doing great. And people love to like most of the people I started working with like almost 20 years ago are still there. Like it's an awesome company. So one of the things that they did was whenever the sales organization needed to change their strategy, they got every single salesperson in the organization together in a room and asked them like what would take down barriers, what would make you be more successful, what would this model look like, and they had all of the salespeople actually build the new sales model, which then informed the new strategy. So a lot of times what happens in organizations is that the leaders get together in a room and they go to the war room and they make this strategy and then they try to push it down and then they scratch their heads about why it doesn't work. So the way you use appreciative inquiry, the way that you use like a different model is saying, how do I get my people involved to build this and make it go from the bottom up? And yeah, I've seen it work a million times. And like, if I'm always thinking about organizations and they flounder, or people aren't bought in, I'm like, you didn't involve them. You just have to involve the people inside of changing strategy or changing the direction, and it will go a million times better. But and it does, and some people listen, and some people do it, but then some people don't, and that's okay too, but it's just gonna be a little bit harder.
Yeah, I think just the idea of starting with what you're great at, whether it's as an organization or the individuals on your team, if you're the team leader, or an individual, if it's just you, is really important. And so we think about like, okay, if we need to shift strategy, our competitors are doing XYZ, like these things need to happen. If we start with what we're doing really well or what we're great at or what our unique value is, like using that
Mhm.
to inform the strategy. And then the other thing I heard from you was like bringing people in from the beginning to build it, right? To have a stake in it, to be bought in because they're part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just the most engaging thing when you can see a group of people, like, building what they and feeling like they have a part in that and what the company is moving towards. It's yeah, it's amazing to see.
Yeah. Another kind of idea around this like strengths based approach is like if you're a team leader and you think about the change your team is going through, your organization is going through, really thinking about where do people individually shine in these different stages. Like if you aren't somebody who maybe is great at connecting with people, hopefully you are because you're the leader, but maybe there's somebody on your team that's like really great at holding space and having conversation, and they can help people maybe work through some of these emotions. Like maybe they lead a session to really talk about, okay, what are the icky things that are going to come along with this change? Or you've got people on your team that are like amazing brainstormers and like innovative thinkers. And so you put them in that middle phase to say, what else can
Mhm.
we do now because of this change? Or someone who's really great at like influence and connecting with people to get them excited about the vision, right? Like how can you use different people's strengths to make a change more effective in an organization and let them play to what they're really good at? We get to fill gaps with each other when we can't be perfect, right? We don't all have all the talents. So how do we leverage different people's talents to play interesting and important roles in this process?
Yes, absolutely. That's something that I hope becomes a big trend moving forward, is this trend away from looking and analyzing and ranking individuals into developing teams, because
Mhm.
it's not like that's where it's at, is how people work together on these teams. And if we can focus our attention more on that and not trying to make all these perfect people inside an organization, I think it's going to go a long way.
Yeah.
And how boring would that be, right?
Right. If we all are supposed to be the same.
Yeah, no, it's not where it's at.
Right. If we mold everybody into the same version of a person, life is no fun.
Yeah, it should be fun, right?
So, as we kind of start to wrap up, I guess I'm curious like what advice or suggestions would you have for someone who is a leader in a change and someone who is going through it?
Okay, so I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but if you're a leader, it is just being as transparent as possible about the change and getting your people involved. I mean, there's some things that happen where you're not going to be able to tell your team, or it could be really bad news. And that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about like if you need to change the direction, or if you're going to start selling something different, if you're going to start changing your approach, get your people involved, and you can use that positive approach. It's like, how do we move forward with this? I want to get all of your ideas. Like, I'm not this person who just like has all the answers and all of the most brilliant strategic ideas. Like, that's not your role as a leader. Your role is to empower this group. So take it to that group of people, have them do the problem solving. And then I think that this goes hand in hand. If you're going through it, or if you're the leader, I think it's just being empathetic to what people are going through if you're the leader, and giving them some awareness. And if you're going through it, hopefully your leader's helping you through that, but you can also go off and get that awareness. Like, go look at transition model. I think that that is a great way of really understanding like your feelings as you go through big change, and understanding that there is grief involved. And the more that you have awareness, the more that you like, we can both tell these stories of times when we were younger that we completely disengaged, right? But if we're being very honest, there's things that we could have done to re-engage, knowing what we know now. Like, I disengaged sometimes just like because I didn't want to go have a hard conversation and go learn more. in a situation. Like my younger self, I would have been like, hey, go talk to that person about that. Like you don't have to disengage. Like there's other options. So
Yeah.
I think if you're going through it yourself, it's like, let me be aware of what I'm going through. Let me take accountability. If there's anything that I can do, let me go off and have conversations. Let me go ask more questions. And that's gonna and if that doesn't work and you're in a crappy situation, then that's a different story, right? But if you're in a
Yeah.
situation that can be salvaged, like understand what you're going through and go and go do what you can because it's probably not the end of the world.
Yeah. There's always that idea of like, there's a lot more impact or influence that we have than we think we do, especially early in our careers. Like, I think a lot of people kind of just have
Totally.
this model in their mind that, like, I can't say something about this. I can't ask for this thing. And like 9 times out of 10, if you have a leader who cares, and I think a lot of them do, like individually as humans, they will try to do something to like help you through this, right? Or to make that possible. And so I think we always have to
Totally.
ask.
It's like there's this idea when we're younger that our managers or our leaders are going to be like all knowing and be our mentors, right? And I try to dispel that with like any young person. I'm like, they also probably don't know what they're doing half the time. They're just faking. Everybody's just faking it. Like if we can understand that, it makes it a lot easier. Everyone's doing their best and they're faking it. And they all have imposter syndrome and they're like, someone's gonna find out I'm not good at my job and get fired, right? Like everyone has that going on inside of them. But if you like, so yeah, like don't look, you don't, your leader does not have to be all knowing, right? Like you can work with them. Okay, one more thing on this, because we're talking about models. I just read the book Gretchen Rubin's Four Tendencies, and she's got this like really easy model about like external and internal motivation. And so there's some people that are just going to do whatever they're told, no questions asked, right? But there's some people that can't really move forward unless they understand the why. Like they're the questioners. And then there's some
Mhm.
people who are going to do everything that people ask because they're just people pleasers, and they're going to do everything. They're going to reject themselves. They're going to do everything for other people until a point where they just completely stop doing everything. And then there's like this other type in there, which is like the rebel. This is actually me, where it's like you can't tell yourself to do anything and no one else can tell you to do anything either. But like I think that that's a good point too for moving forward, is saying like go take that quiz on the four. I'll do a plug here, even I don't work for them, but I think it's just helpful. It's easy. Go take that assessment and say like, am I a questioner, am I a obliger, am I a rebel, am I an upholder? Because that will also give you information about like what you need to do to help yourself move out of changes, right? And if it's just asking more questions, then you know that you just need your questions answered to move forward. That's something really easy you can do to salvage whatever's going on if you're languishing. Okay, that was a lot.
No, I think that's an important point too. Because also, like, if you are a leader of a team, knowing these things about yourself is also really important because
Yes.
we go through life just like assuming, okay, well, I'm this kind of person. So that's what I need. I'm going to give that to my team. And we don't really stop to question, like, is this person different? Do they need something different? Do they need more context or do they need more connection or do they need more something else? And we just naturally kind of treat people the way that we would want to be treated, right? That's what we were all taught as the golden
Exactly.
rule. And it's like absolutely the wrong thing to do. So I think it's a good way to think about it.
No, I mean, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Like, no one is like you. Your leader is not all-knowing mentor, and no one thinks the same as you, so go get curious and figure it out. All right.
Yeah. So I think my advice for folks that are leading changes or leading teams through changes is I'm going to be a broken record too. And it's be choiceful about the changes that you go pursue in the organization. Don't change something every month. Like, don't change something major every quarter. People are not going to be able to get settled back into operating at a normal pace. Like productivity will go down during times of major change. It will. And you've got to like factor that into the model. You've got to factor that into the financials of whatever it is you're going to save or you're going to create on the other side of that. And if you actually thought about it that way, would you still make the change? If you had to put twice as many resources into the change and you were going
Mm,
to get half the returns, would you still do that?
a
And I
great
think
frame.
it's an important thing to think about. Do we even do this? So being choiceful about it. And then I think just being proactive with having those conversations with your team about like what they are inevitably going to experience. Like, don't assume that they're not going to freak out or be scared or worry about their jobs or worry about their relationships, because they will. And if you're not talking about it
Mhm.
with them, they're talking about it with each other, or they're talking about it with all the other people that you're just not part of those conversations. So just like be part of the conversation and like create that like kind of safe space to have it.
Yeah. Wait, what would be your advice for the individual?
For the individual, um, this is coming from I identify as a world-class emotional compartmentalizer. So
Oh my.
it is going to be like slow down and actually like embrace the the sadness, the things you're going to leave behind, the things that are going to change. It's okay to be excited about the new, and it's also okay and healthy and often needed to think about what you might be losing. So
Yeah.
I think it's the advice that I would give to myself, and the advice that I do still give to myself every day.
Chill out. Feel your feelings. Go watch Inside Out 2. It'll help.
I didn't get to that this weekend, but I'm going to. I'm excited for it. So one resource that we mentioned, I want to ask you if there's any other, or we mentioned two, really, right? So the Bridges transition model is a great one. There's a great book called Managing Transitions. I will put the link to that in the show notes. And then is it Gretchen Rubin, The Four Tendencies?
Mhm.
That was one you mentioned.
Yeah, a couple other ones. Okay, so Appreciative Inquiry, I think my favorite book on that is Jackie Starbos and Sherry Torres. It's called Conversations Worth Having. So it's kind of a combination of appreciative inquiry and the conversations that we have with the people that are in our lives. So that's a good one. Other resources, okay. Oh my gosh, I'm going to riddle y'all with some books here. So just bear with me. So a good one for organizational leaders is Change. So it's the newest John Kotter book. So it's got really, really good case studies of how people go through change. And then I love the neuro leadership SCARF model, because I think that if you are working in an organization where there's a lot of technical minds, if we can explain and that book Change helps with this too, that if we can talk about it in a scientific way, that if you're sending people's brains into fight or flight, that it makes it so that you reduce creativity, you reduce innovation, you reduce productivity and collaboration, all of the things that we need people working together inside of an organization to do. It hurts it. So if we can talk about it in a scientific way, I think it can maybe open minds that need to be opened to how we help human beings go through human changes. So yeah, those are a few more. Oh, and okay, last one is adaptive leadership. So there's some really great things. If you're a leader and you want to get better at the skill of leading through change, adaptive leadership is also one of my go-tos.
Love that. And I think SCARF model is a good one to, if you don't do four tendencies, or you don't know your Enneagram type, or you don't, think about it from a DISC standpoint. I think, there's some of those frameworks that are more
Yeah.
behavioral and they're kind of like more surface level. There's some that are about kind of like, what's that thing underneath the surface, right? And so like the four tendencies that you mentioned is like, okay, what do people need to get past a barrier, right? Like, do I need to understand the why, or do I need to get over my own pushback against authority, or, whatever that is. SCARF is a good one because it talks about kind of like these five kind of core human needs, like, connectedness or autonomy or fairness. And like, what are the things that people hold on to? What are the things that are required to make people feel safe? Like, it really truly is like in that sense, like a way to think about different needs, right? Which ones do you lean into and which ones do your team members lean into?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yep. A lot of resources to go learn about people.
Well, and I knew personally by asking you that question, I was going to get like 18 books. So it's, it was, I know you and I know how you operate and the number of books that you read. So I think it'll be good. We'll give people a bunch of resources. Just know like you don't need to read them all and learn them all, but like
No,
pick one, start in one place and just kind of like see what you can take away from it.
absolutely. It's all just grabbing little skills and little tactics as you go.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for being on and having this conversation. I think it's an important one. There's probably 18 more conversations that we could have stemming from this one, but we'll leave it at this for right now.
In case anyone's wondering what our phone calls sound like, it's this. And yeah, it's a lot.
I mean, we left out all the trauma talk, but that's
Yeah.
part of it too. That's, it's fine. All right. Thank you, Kara.
Thank you.